Hello, everybody. So I am Joe Filipenko, not Jason today. Everybody is she's traveling today, so I'm from the Buddy INS marketing team here filling in as there's a lot on the road traveling. So I just wanted to jump in, welcome you to another edition of the Buddy Study Group, and introduce our guest speaker today, Linda. So Linda's going to go through the claims process for long-term care insurance with us, whether it's for clients in her LTC practice or in her claims consulting business. She has a lot of experience to share with us today. So feel free to ask Linda any questions you may have by typing them in the chat. Um, I'll go ahead and I can pause and read those questions out. So yeah, Linda, good. Thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll let you take it away.
There we go. There we go. Be easier if you can hear me. And so basically just a little bit about me. For those of you who don't know, I've been specializing in long-term care insurance for about 25 years now. And I started doing claims for clients about 9 years ago because I realized that we sell promises of insurance companies. And I thought, what a great opportunity for me to understand what our clients are going to go through when they go into claim. So I had a gentleman who came to me. He said his mom was wanted to go to a dementia assisted living. And in fact, it was a nursing home only policy. Well, in my mind, a dementia unit is the same actuarial assumption as a nursing home, right? You're not going to a dementia unit to play bingo or shuffleboard, right? It's the last place on earth you'll ever go, and it's the highest quality of care for that specific need. So I decided I would go to bat for this gentleman. After all, I sell promises. That wasn't my promise, but I sell general promises. I want to make sure all those promises are kept. And I was able to talk to the claims department about the actuarial assumptions and why this was a justified claim, and they did approve it. A couple of years later, my mother was going into claim. She had an old CNA policy that only had the wording of home care and nursing home, and they were told by the assisted livings in Florida that CNA would never pay for an assisted living, and that there was an attorney who was trying to get people through the assisted living on this policy and to give them a call. He was charging $15,000 to take people through claim and 5% of every year of their benefit for the remainder of their existence. Highway robbery, taking advantage of a very unfortunate situation for people in a critical time when they couldn't help themselves. This was not rocket scientist. It was at this point that I said, you know what? I need to really be there as an advocate for people. And so in less than 30 days, I had my parents approved for assisted living setting on that policy. A year and a half later, that attorney finished his class action suit and got it approved. So based on that, I expanded the claims concept of my company. And so for the last 9 years, we've been doing claims for people. But what's really important is to make sure that when you're selling policies, you're selling for the claim, because that's what it's all about, right? It's all about what happens when they need this policy. Is it going to work the way it was intended and the way they believed it was going to work? So you need to understand that when you sell a policy, you want to be thinking about the claim. Do you really know what you're selling to make sure that the client knows what they're buying? So we're going to start off really with very basic stuff just to make sure that everyone's on the same page. Most of this is going to be, you all know this and all kinds of stuff. I just want to make sure that we don't leave anything out that's important going forward. So I want to talk about contract language, and then the claims process, medical records, and then making sure you're setting client expectations with them when they enter into a claim. So we all know that to qualify for a qualified long-term care policy, it is when you need assistance in 2 out of 6 daily living skills or a severe cognitive impairment requiring substantial supervision, right? So what is 2 out of 6, what does assistance in 2 out of 6 daily living skills really mean? Well, it's important to understand that it doesn't have to be hands-on physical assistance. It can be standby, which means arm's reach. So if someone says, I need you to stand by me when I get in and out of the shower because I might fall, and that person cannot stand on the outside of the door and just peeking in. They need to be right there. That is assistance. And keep in mind that feeding assistance, make sure people understand that feeding is not setting up the meal. It is from the table to the mouth. So it is very, 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 very rare that anyone will ever use the feeding definition for assistance in long-term care.
So, hey, Linda, I'm buffering for
Good.
Mark and Jason, so I'll pop in with a couple questions that come through. And I
Absolutely.
don't
Go
want
right
to
ahead.
disrupt your flow. But while we're talking about standby and hands-on, so the feeding is interesting because my father had a stroke and his left part of his body did not work. He could eat all day using his right hand, but the guy couldn't open a can of soup. So how, when you're looking at the claim, how does that work in a claim situation?
Yeah. So unfortunately, that does not qualify because it's based on the time from the time the food is placed on the table, and it's from the table to the mouth. So if he needed help, that would be considered food preparation, the opening of the can,
Right?
and that would not qualify. So if he can get the food from the table into his mouth, then he's all set,
Gotcha.
right? That would be that he would be considered independent in feeding.
As I
So
get that question a lot.
yeah, and people need to understand it
Yeah.
really does take a lot. Now, when would somebody from the table to the mouth? Well, they may have tremors, right? So they may not be able to get food from the to the mouth because by the time they get the soup up, there's nothing there. There's nothing on their fork, there's nothing on their spoon, right? They may not be able to get the food off the plate, right? They may not have that coordination to get the food off the plate, or their fork into some food. It may be for people who have feeding tubes, who actually cannot feed. They have swallowing problems, so they can't. They need a professional to actually administer food through a tube into their bodies. So that could be an assist. And sometimes they can be independent some other factors, but usually when they need that much care, they're needing care in the more likely assistance of bathing, dressing, toileting, or transferring, right? And whatever the problem is, it has to be documented in the medical records or it doesn't exist, right? So if you don't have anything documented, it isn't real. The other one is severe cognitive impairment. So this and this really gets people. You really need to tell people. Most people will need some form of assistance prior to using their long-term care policies because people with severe cognitive impairment have minimal impairment first, and they may not be able to manage their budgets. They may not be able to manage their bills, or they can't manage their doctor's appointments, right? And yet they are still safe to live in their own home. They need somebody to come in a few times a week to make sure they're doing what they need to do, but they're still safe to be at their home. Severe cognitive impairment is when you don't want to leave someone in the home for more than a couple of hours because you're not sure what's going to happen. That's a severe cognitive impairment. And it doesn't have to be just memory. It can be a combination of memory, judgment, processing, planning, such that someone might just have a mild to moderate memory impairment and a mild to moderate processing, but they're already on the ladder trying to change a light bulb before they remember that they're not supposed to be on the ladder. So it can be a combination of multiple cognitive impairments that bring them to the severe level that it's unsafe. So it is substantial supervision. Some policies even talk about continuous supervision to protect oneself or someone else from health or safety, right? So you're afraid to leave them alone because they might do something. And it has to be documented on standardized tests. So if somebody comes to you and says, I think I need to make a claim, you say, have you had any cognitive testing? Because that's the easiest and most efficient way to get through claims is if there's real documentation identifying that there's a moderate to severe impairment in multiple levels, orientation, just deductive or abstract reasoning in addition to the memory. Now let's just go through a little bit of the language in the charts, and we'll come back to those two key components of going into claim, just to make sure that when you're talking about these policies, people should be aware if there's a calendar day or if it's a reimbursement system, if there's a waiver of home care, if the waiver of home care is going to fulfill the facility elimination period, right? So all of these things are really important, because when people go into claim and suddenly realize they have a 90-day period that needs to be fulfilled with a covered service, and covered services today are a minimum of 4 hours of care, because no one walks into your house for an hour of care. And in states like Massachusetts, when 1 hour of care is $6,000 a month because you need 4 hours and they're charging $50 an hour, they need to be aware that that 90-day elimination period is an $18,000 out of pocket period, right? Just to get that 1 hour touched base. So people need to be a little bit, understand the impacts of their policy so they don't panic when they go into claim. So if you're dealing with someone who doesn't have a lot of money and you're doing, you're selling the policy, keep in mind, these are the typical people who you want to do the waivers to make sure that when they go into claim, they've got money coming in, because they don't want to run out before they get a chance to start collecting. Know that on some of the policies, even the calendar day policies, start when there is a covered service that is being received. So in other words, if they're in a rehab and that rehab is considered a hospital rehab as opposed to a long-term care rehab, those days may not be considered covered by even a calendar day elimination period. So you have to read the policies. So in terms of even looking at calendar day. All right, so I think we went over that, make sure we're there. Home care, right? If somebody wants home care, we need to make sure that we need to ask when we're selling the policy, is it important to have independent home care providers? If it is, you need to be selling like a Mutual of Omaha policy instead of a National Guardian Life or a Thrivent policy, for example, which do require agency caregivers. Now, there's nothing wrong with agency caregivers. In fact, I usually encourage people to have agency caregivers because there's a backup plan, right? So if you're selling a policy and it's an agency caregiving, that's perfectly legitimate, and that's actually not a bad thing. It forces people to have that backup protection. If the aide doesn't show up, an agency sends somebody else to provide that care. You have an independent caregiver, that caregiver gets sick, that caregiver's mother needs help, they have a wedding, they're not showing up to take care of your client, right? So, but some people have a perception that they absolutely need that flexibility to have independent caregivers. So you need to make sure that that is included in your selling process, to make sure that when they go into claim, they're not thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I require an agency and I have to have 4 hours of caregiving when I thought I could have hired somebody independently, right? So it's all about expectation when they go into claim. Now, not every state requires a licensed or certified agency. So for example, in Massachusetts has what's called employment agencies for home care. So literally, and I had a client do this, and I checked with the insurance company to make sure everything was legit, right? So I had a daughter who was a physician's assistant who wanted to provide care for her mother. The policy required an agency caregiver. I called the insurance company and said, is it okay if the agency is owned by the caregiver? That's perfectly fine. So I had the daughter create an agency, which was literally creating a name in Massachusetts, and the agency billed the insurance company, and the company paid, and the insurance company paid the client based on that company, and that, so the daughter was getting paid as an agency. So understanding the state requirements for home care and where that person might reside will also impact the flexibility. California does not, or I should say, allows for independent caregivers across all policies. So even though the company might say licensed and certified, the company cannot insist on that, right? Because it's the state that ultimately makes that determination. So, sometimes you have a little more flexibility than actually is in the policy based on the state's guidance. But
Hey, Linda, Linda, I want to interject here. I have a question.
Yeah.
So when the policy, and I mean, I've been in the industry for a long time as well, but I'm always amazed that so many clients, and I've got 11 on claim right now, 4 of them have moved out of the state in which that paper was written on. And get confused about, okay, but I'm not in that state, so I can use my family. So can you address that?
Certainly. So everything comes down to contract definition, right? So if a company, so there are certain companies that are very clear and unambiguous. You need an agency caregiver. End of discussion. So if that state allows you to create an own agency, then you might be able to create your own agency. If the state does not, then, or if it's a detailed, you know, there's a lot of rules behind the certification or licensing of a home care agency in a state, then an individual is not going to be able to do that. So there are policies that are very specific that say that you can use independent CNAs. And there are cash policies that say that you can use anyone you want. So if anybody ever says, I want to use a family member, you have to use a cash policy. That's the answer. You have to use a cash policy if you want to use family members. Because even the policies that allow independent caregivers, they're going to be CNAs. You know, generally speaking. Then there are some rules that, you know, 50%, 25%, but really, you need every single dollar you have in your policy. So we won't even talk about the 25 and 50% that you could use in cash, you know, for family members, right? We you know, we want to give them the big bag, right? So, but yeah, you want to, so that's the answer.
Linda?
Yes.
I'm going through a claim right now with my dad.
Yep.
And my daughter had her CNA, let the license lapse. And we're using Amada. And we were trying to figure out, it's an old Transamerica policy, so you have to use a licensed home health care agency. But what the guy at Amada said to me is, if you want, I will hire your daughter. I'll put her on my payroll, and then you can go ahead and use her, and we'll follow the rules that way.
Absolutely. So here's the little thing you got to be aware of, right? So if it's a family member, then then that's not going to be so much of a problem, right? So if the agency hires the family member to go out and care for you, that's all, you know, that's all hunky dory. But let's say an agency, you say, I have a neighbor who wants to be my aide, and you go out to an agency, will you hire my neighbor? They're not going to be quite as flexible unless that aide is a CNA, because if something happens, they're sending out an unskilled person out to your house. So, you know, that person drops the client, or somebody slips and falls, whatever. You've got, you know, agencies are going to think about liability. So again, you're not going to sue your daughter, but if push comes to shove and something's big enough, you may feel the need to sue the caregiver, right? So I do tell people, if they have a favorite CNA down the street that they want to be a caregiver, or if they have a neighbor or friend who wants to become a CNA, then absolutely they can go out and they can go to an agency, and the agency would more than happy hire a person and send them out and get a cut from doing, you know, they don't have, you know how much it costs an agency to find people that they like and trust enough and train to go out into a person's home, and you're providing that person up front. They're thrilled to do it. So that's not the problem. But they will want some kind of CNA licensing, or, you know, most likely by these agencies before they send them out to your house, given that, you know, they're going to be a little bit more flexible if there's some kind of history of CNA type of stuff that you know, that might have been from another country or whatever. There may be some guidelines have been in the family for 20 years and they took care of the father, and now they're going to take. So the greater the relationship between the family and this person, the easier it is for the agency to give a little leniency on that CNA certification. But generally, they're going to want a CNA certification even to hire them, to send them back out for their own liability. But family is a good one. But good point. Yeah, we try to be as flexible as we can, and we try to come up with ideas to meet our clients' needs to the best of their abilities by using what's out there. I know in the old Genworth policies, coordination services can affect the elimination period. The actual documentation in the Genworth policy says that that 0-day elimination period and the monthly payment are based on the use of coordination services by Genworth. So if you do have people who have Genworth policies, make sure they're asking when they call up that to use their coordination services. You also want to make sure, see where how the medical equipment to home modifications, if they're coming out of the back of the policy or if it's a gift. So like Mutual of Omaha, it's an extra month. But most policies come out from the back of the policy. Some of the older policies, it's just a gift. So know where that money's coming from. So when people want to go into claim, it's important to understand that not everyone is ready for claim when they call you. So a client calls you up and says, yeah, we're ready to make claim. And remember, you play a very fine role in this because you are an agent of the company and you are also the agent of your client. So you have to stay right on line with the contract language, right? So when someone calls you up, before you start explaining the policy, ask the questions. So when they call you up, they say, I'm ready to make a claim, you say, so tell me a little bit about what's going on. And sometimes they'll say, I just can't drive anymore and I can't do my shopping and I can't make meals. And then you say, how are you doing with the bathing? Oh yeah, I'm fine with the bathing and dressing. Yeah, no problem at all. Okay. This is when you say, the bad news is I'm really sorry. Currently your level of disability is not going to qualify you to submit a claim. But there is good news, which is you're really not impaired enough to qualify for a long-term care claim. So that's actually good that you're actually better than you thought you were, right? Because we know how many people use these policies, and you're still pretty good. But unfortunately, there is bad news, and unfortunately, most of these things get worse. And there's likely a time that you're going to need to qualify for your long-term care benefits. But the good news is, when that happens, your insurance contract will go into effect, right? So this is what you can tell your clients. You got to stay on that line, right? Because you don't want to be an advocate for something that is not legitimate. If it's not a legitimate claim. So what happens with claims, right? So claims documentation is really important. As I said, everything has to come down to documentation. And the vast majority of denials are due to documentation. Doctors are very, very busy right now. And so they use electronic medical records. So there's a lot of checkoffs in these electronic medical records that never get touched. For example, alert and oriented ×3, normal speech. Those things are checked off. I had somebody who had less than a 10-minute recall. And in the note, it says, short-term memory impairment, and in fact, it actually said, only driving around the neighborhood during the daytime, which wasn't even true. He hadn't been driving for 2 years. But of course, the client, being impaired, remembers that he has an impairment and he would only drive around during the day. And so it sounded legitimate to the doctor enough that he wrote it in the medical record. If you're driving, you're not going to be impaired enough to go into claim. So you have to make sure that the medical records are accurate. And down below, it said alert and oriented ×3. This guy was not alert and oriented ×3. He was alert, but he was oriented by 2, right? So we need to make sure that medical records are going in accurately. So what I encourage people to do is once you know that this person is appropriate for a claim, you can help guide them through the medical records process to make sure that they say to their doctor, can you make sure that my medical diagnosis is accurate in the chart? So medical records, ideally to go through claims, should read something to this effect. Client has, for example, spinal stenosis. Spinal stenosis is causing impaired mobility due to decreased sensation, decreased strength, decreased coordination, high risk for falls, recommending standby assist for bathing, dressing, transfers, right? Slam dunk through claims, right? Clear. Doctor gave a diagnosis. He gave the functional results of that diagnosis. and his recommendation for safety. Very easy. And then you have the supplemental notes from the home care providers and rehab that are saying the same things. The more notes that come in consistent, the easier the claim process. Whenever you have inconsistency in the claim process, you get a denial, right? And the reason for that is that the problem is that there are a lot of claims that go in that are not legitimate. And people often feel entitled. I've been paying for this for 25 years, right? That is not a reason to get through claim. This is a contract, right? So we need to make sure that they're and so what happens is some of these people will say, I've been paying this 25 years. I'm 95 years old. Of course they should be paying for me. Well, no, you could be a 95-year-old who can still bathe and dress, and you just can't drive and do your laundry. That is not a reason for claim. And so what they do is they go to their doctor and they say, doctor, I need you to write in the medical record that I need help in these areas. And the doctor says, sure, no big deal. No sweat off me. I can write those things in the medical record for you. And off we go to claim. And then there's some inconsistency. And the flags go up, and then they need to check more into the claim. A lot of times we'll find that the medical record is not that clear, and the medical records are saying, independent, or and then there's the home care provider that's saying that there needs assistance, right? But it could be that the doctor wrote in this invalid statement, and then they get home care 2 days a week. They have home care 2 days a week. What are they doing the other 5 days of the week, right? Inconsistent claims, right? If somebody is independent 5 days a week, they're probably not needing assistance with 2 of 6 daily living skills, right? Unless there's somebody in the house that justifies it. My wife is in the house, my spouse is in the house, my child is in the house, and they're providing those other days of care, for financial reasons, for convenience reasons, for whatever reasons it is. So we only need help on the 2 days that the person's taking a shower. So even though the person needs help in bathing and dressing, we're only requiring, assistance outside the home for the days that he's taking the shower, and otherwise the family can take care of it. But you have to understand, when things go into, if they're not explained, you get a note going into claims that says somebody only needs help 2 days a week. That's going to be a denial, right? Because it's inconsistent. So I've even had claims denied because of inaccurate nursing home notes, where client went out to the hospital. It's during COVID. There was no knowledge that the client ever came back to the nursing home. No notes. The person was there. We were able to pull the Medicaid, the Medicare bills, and prove that the person was in fact at that nursing home. Inconsistency leads to a denial. So we needed the nursing home to write that in fact the client was actually there from this date to this date, and the person was approved, right? And we needed that to fulfill that 90-day elimination period so the person could go home. Inadequate home care notes. Yep.
Do you have a question in the chat that I wanted to ask you real quick? We got a question that says, does journaling decrease cognitive behavior of a family member by the family help with the claims documentation?
Ask me that again. Ask me that again.
Yeah. Yeah. So does journaling decrease cognitive behavior of a family member by the family help with the claims documentation?
Yes, journaling does help. Yes. So especially journaling that's in the medical record. So for example, and I say to people, when you're starting your decline, when you're in the doctor's office, you say, my spouse left the water on. Things just aren't right. Or my spouse is getting more agitated than they usually is. Can you just make sure those notes, when I say this, can you make sure those notes are in the medical record? My spouse, it can no longer do the laundry. My spouse can no longer do. All those types of little incidentals are really helpful. So by the time they go into claim and they look back, they say, oh, this is obvious. There's been decline. This has been going on for a while. Boom. Now we're ready to go into claim, right? So certainly the journaling is helpful. Now, where journaling is not helpful is inadequate home care notes, where we have what we call babysitting notes, where the aides write things like, came in, client dressed himself, we took a walk, we had lunch, I made him lunch, he read the newspaper, put him back to bed, right? So now what really took place? Abe came in, laid out the clothes so the client could put on the correct clothes, made lunch because the client wouldn't have known what to eat lunch, took him out for a walk because he wouldn't have used his cane and wouldn't have found his way back, and he was reading the newspaper upside down. Okay, so, but from those notes, you would have no indication that this person was a companion versus an assistant. So home care notes need to be detailed enough that it is clear to the underwriter for claims that these are not companion notes. These are skilled intervention notes by a care provider, that true care direction is needed. We call it cueing and supervision, right? So those need to really be included. We get minimalistic primary care notes and even skilled psychiatrists notes, sometimes ridiculous, where primary care notes, as I said, they could say minimal cognitive impairment, right? 10-minute recall, minimal cognitive impairment. I swear doctors do not like to say bad things about people as they age because they can't make them better, right? So you're younger, you stub your toe, it's in the medical record, and then it's hard to get into a long-term care policy. But when you're older, they leave all those things out. They don't want to write bad things because it's sad and there's nothing they can do about it. So why even document it? And that's the only thing I can come up with, because I see some severe things and they're not even documented in the medical record. I mean, I talk to people all the time and I'll say, how's your doctor feeling about it? I'm going into assisted living. He recommended that assisted living is a good place. And I look in the notes. There is nothing in the medical record that indicates that this person needs any kind of assistance and that he felt that assisted living was the appropriate setting for him. So I've had psychiatrists, when they're doing their diagnostics, and they write progressive dementia. What does that mean? Is it the beginning of dementia? Is it middle of dementia? Is it the end of dementia? What does this mean functionally? And when I called the psychiatrist to say, could you be more explicit? Like, where in the phase of the progressive dementia is this person? Do you have testing to justify it? His response was, the insurance company just doesn't want to pay. And well, that's not really true. The insurance company doesn't know what the problem is, right? Can you help me here, right? So it's really interesting that we can have such terrible documentation from what we considered skilled professionals.
Hey, Linda.
Yeah.
I want to jump in here. I have one client, not currently on claim, but she went on and off claim. Period. She fell out of her, she's a big rig driver, fell out of her truck, broke her arm, fractured her pelvis, had her femur broken in two, like it was bad. So she was out for 10 months. So claim was paid, Genworth policy. Then similar situation happened about a year and a half later, and she went, it was a nightmare going back on claim again. Can you speak to that? Is that an odd thing? Now, I did not help her with the claim process, but can you speak to that at all? People going on claim, coming off, and then going on again.
Every claim has to be taken as if it's the first claim, right? And you also have to take into consideration when you change environments. For some insurance companies, they perceive it as a completely new claim. Even when it's going from home care to assisted living, which would seem like a natural transition, they look at it as a new claim. So you need to make sure that when somebody is starting a claim or changing their environment, that you contact the insurance company to find out what their expectations are. So you can be one step ahead of the curve, and know that sometimes they just need the plan of care from the assisted living and smooth sailing. And sometimes they want to do a full review of the client. So you need to know that. And you can stand on ethics too. Like I really work hard with insurance companies not to do a cognitive assessment twice on an individual. That is one area we know does not get better, right? So if you have a cognitive impairment such that you require substantial supervision, you're not getting better. I mean, I can't think of any situation in which people have gotten better. I mean, maybe in an acute head injury and the bleed dissipates and they come back to life. But when we're talking about an 85-year-old and it's dementia, we're going one way. And it is stressful enough for these people to take that testing once, and for the families to watch how impaired their parents are or their spouses are, or to do that again. So I have talked to claims departments and said to them, it is unethical for you to do a full cognitive assessment again on this patient. I give you permission, that's why I give you the authority that you may pull all the medical records you want. You may talk to the assisted living setting. You may talk to the nurses and the doctors and the aides, but you may not talk to my client and you may not talk to their family. It is just not fair. You have all the information you need. We know, you know, that people are not getting better from this. You have an entire month of claims in the assisted living or in the memory care unit. It's not going away. So do what's ethical, and just do what you need, you know, and get the notes and processes again for another year. And I've not had anyone push back on it. Well, actually, they tell me this is what they have to do, and then you push a little harder and you get to the next level, and you stand your ground on behalf of your clients, and you can get through it. And they will pull medical records, and they will go through if you don't want them to go through that again. Now, physical impairment is different because people get better. People have surgeries, people have exercise. I mean, you can be 85 years old and be on a walker and get to a cane again, right? So physical impairments are very different. So I have no problem with complete reviews of physical impairments. But when it's cognitive like that, it's really, really devastating to the client and to the family. I had one client, the first time she went through this cognitive assessment, she said to me, she called her son afterwards. Now, I was there because I was, you know, I wanted to see what the first assessment was like. And it was a 2-hour assessment. It was tough. It was just myself and this one other lady. She called her son and said, there was a group of people here. There were like 4 people testing me for hours and hours on end. That's what it felt to her. It felt like there was a group of people, you know, tormenting her with questions that she could not answer. And it was devastating. So, and I assured him that it was not that way. There was only one person asking questions, and she was very kind as she could, but it was time consuming. And I could feel the stress of not being able to answer what she knew were simple questions, which is a really difficult thing for anyone to have to endure. So we don't want to have people endure that more than once if they need to go through claim. And it's okay to stop the process too. If it is evident and they're doing something, you can say, I think you have enough. You know, we can go forward. So,
hey, Linda, are you finding when it comes to a claim, if husband and wife, that it's the spouse that is putting the claim in, or is it a family member, as in children, or?
It's both. It's both, yeah. And what sometimes happens, so I actually had one, which is sort of almost a funny story. It was during COVID, and the claims adjuster called to do a memory assessment on the wife. The husband's in the room, didn't realize it was a cognitive assessment. And there's this almost innate feeling to want questions to be answered. So he'd hear the question, the wife couldn't answer it. He'd whisper the answer to the wife would answer. So she passed the cognitive assessment because he answered all the questions for her. This was the one in which the doctor put progressive dementia, which didn't answer anything. So the claim was denied. And unfortunately, all they were asking for was adult day health. So I called the claims section. I said, hey, listen, I said, I understand why you denied this claim, right? The husband told me he realized afterwards that this was the cognitive assessment, and he answered the questions for her, and the psychiatrist was completely inadequate in his documentation. But let me ask you, who goes to adult day health? And I just stopped. Who goes to adult day health? Only those that are severely cognitively impaired that you are too afraid to leave at home by themselves. I said, so although all the documentation says this person probably doesn't need to go into claim, by the definition of where this person is asking for their claim benefits to be paid, it should just be an automatic approval. Because no one wants to go to adult daycare. and they're only there because of a severe cognitive impairment. And they approved the claim. So you can, sometimes you have to help underwriting, get out of their own way from, looking at, the ABCs of documentation and really say, really what's going on here, right?
Right.
This was the person I was talking about. This is a legit, he was dressed when I arrived, he ate breakfast, read the newspaper, went for a walk, he watched TV, took a nap, good day, right? And this is a client that we went back. I actually went back through the medical records and had him appealed, wrote a letter, went back to the medical records of all that. Fortunately, the family had talked about all his declines and all the things he was doing. And I had the home care agency, I changed their documentation so they could check off more appropriately what they were doing, resubmitted, and he was retroactive. He went back 6 months and was paid for 6 months that he was due.
Linda, I have a question that needs an answer.
Yes.
Okay, so this is from Michael, and he says, sorry, this is a little personal, but others may have encountered this. My mother-in-law just qualified for an in-home supportive services through Medicaid, physical and cognitive, California Medi-Cal. She has a Genworth long-term care policy about 2006, and we have not filed a claim yet. Does the state benefits affect our ability to file a claim with Genworth? Does it make it easier or harder for Genworth to approve or deny that claim?
It does not impact the claim in the sense of qualifying, but it depends on how much. Remember, Genworth is a reimbursement policy. So if you need additional funds for caregivers or services related to long-term care, then absolutely make a claim. And yes, it would be helpful because all those people who are in the house from Medi-Cal that's coming in will have documentation of what they're doing, and you can submit that documentation to Genworth. You can't double dip though. If the state is paying for care, you can't submit that same care to Genworth for funding as well.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Good one, Michael.
Yeah. So this is what I was talking about, typical medical records, you get all this basic stuff, smoking history, unstated gait, cognitive, alert, and oriented ×3, and this is usually pre-set in there and they forget to change this little thing, in the medical records. When you have inconsistency in medical records, it becomes a problem. So you always want to make sure that everything, oftentimes you have the spouse who's assisting with dressing and bathing and provides the continual supervision. That needs to be in the medical record, right? So if the spouse is providing this care, it should be documented that way, and that should be enough often to get you starting through the claims process. It doesn't have to be a professional that's documenting that the spouse is saying that this is what she's doing every day, and there's enough medical information that says that this person could use that care. You don't need a professional. Well, actually, I should say many of these do require a plan of care, which does have to be by a skilled professional. So do be aware of that. But for those of them who don't require a plan of care, having this other language is perfectly fine as long as it comes from the doctor, at some point, because they will be asking. Every claim will reach out to a primary care to get information. And if you have more information in a psychiatrist, then you'll want to reach out to that psychiatrist or the orthopedist or any other specialist. But they will always go to the primary care first. Okay, so let's see. Yeah. So this is, typical note. And this is, mixed moderate dementia, list of medications, exercise, cognitive stimulation, hearing test, follow-up in 1 year. But if they just added one thing, results in the need for substantial supervision for safety or performance of 2 ADL skills, then you've got the claim. So you've got all this information in the medical record. If they can put in a functional note, it makes a difference. The big thing you want to make sure of is that they're not talking about the long-term care policy. Doctors will often write, when you say, oh, I'm filing a claim, client, patient absolutely should be getting money from the insurance company, should have, the claim should be approved. Well, that just upsets the claims department. It's not their job to tell them that they should be, saying that this claim is legitimate. they don't even know what the contract is. How do they know that this person should be approved for claim? So it's not helpful because it feels almost collusional in terms of the claim. So you really want to make sure that the doctor focuses on what he's supposed to do or she's supposed to do, which is document the client's illness, the impact of that illness, and the functional recommendations. That's it. And the insurance company will determine whether that's enough information to approve the claim. Now here's something that's interesting. And I just had a client who sent me, said that their mom's in therapy right now, in rehab. She's going to be home. They're talking about coming home with assistance and yada, yada, yada. And I said, get the medical records. At least get the initial note. She's not discharged yet. See what the plan is for your mom in the rehab department. Because most rehab therapists automatically say the goal is return to original function or return to independence. And when that person's discharged, it is very easy, almost too easy for the therapist to write goals met, goals met, goals met, goals go, discharge, home. That is a problem when they are still a supervision or a minimal assist, because now you have inconsistent documentation again, right? The discharge from the hospital needs to be accurate. So if you have a client who calls you, they're being hospitalized, they're going through rehab, ask them to make sure they're talking to their therapist to make sure that the discharge notes are clear and accurate and accurately depict what the discharge is actually happening. That if the person is going home with caregivers because they need caregivers, that it's documented in that plan. I can personally say that my mom had home therapy. She was leaving my house. She was going back to Florida to care in Florida, where she was going to get home care in Florida continue because she was still in assist for showering and dressing and bathing. And the notes when she was discharged from Massachusetts was independent. And I called them and I said, are you kidding me? I said, she was not independent. You need to change those notes. They said, well, we can't change those notes. Well, they're inaccurate. And, there was nothing I could do because they were already done. So you have to get it. I mean, I suppose I could have, filed a claim against Medicare and whatever and made them crazy. But so much easier if you're in the day before they write that note before it gets into the computer, right? Because nobody wants to admit that they're engaging in fraudulent activity by not accurately, evaluating their clients. Happens way too often. We often see notes. I had another client. They had a home care agent, home care nursing agency in there, and they were going to teach the client and the family how to use this catheter. So that's incontinence and toileting, right? 2 ADLs, lower body dressing. Well, as they got into it, now they were there for month after month, and then they realized that this guy has dementia, and he's never going to learn. And they really can't teach the wife. The wife is having trouble learning too. So they just come in on a regular basis, and they've been doing it for months and months and months. So I said, oh, this is easy enough, right? I go in, I pull. Every month they have to do a plan of care. Every month what they did is they took that first plan of care and just copied it and sent in it every single month. So every single month it was identical. There was nothing different from that first one. They just made it easy, copied it, and used it every month because nobody ever checks these things, except when you're going into claim. And now you have inaccurate documentation because the nurse was too lazy to actually write a new note. And I called her on it. And first I called her and I said, hey, listen, I have your notes. He's going to claim. And they were like, oh yeah, no problem. I'm going to send you all my notes. Yeah, no problem. He absolutely needs to go into claim. And then I called them up and I said, hey, you've been copying, the notes aren't indicating that there's been any decline. Is there any? Gone. Never returned a phone call when I questioned their notes. Totally gone. Couldn't reach them ever again. They were in another state. There was nothing I could do, right? So then we had to get we got a nurse to come in to do a plan of care in the home again, so we could have another independent professional documenting his level of care. So really, you got to really be careful there with documentation at discharge and home care and therapies and nurses. Anyone who's dealing with a client, You got to make sure that they're actually doing their job and they're documenting accurately each month, so that you have these notes that when you go into claim, everything works, right? It's a natural, easy claim because the notes are accurate. So
Linda, when your clients go on claim,
Mhm.
do you have that conversation? As I'm sure you have, because this is what a big part of what you do. But having that family around, having those advocates around, because if it wasn't for you on many of these situations, and I think probably many on this call as well, but in particular you, if you're having the conversation with the spouse and you're helping with the claim, how important are you finding it that the whole family is clued in? Because I think in terms of family, that stuff hits the fan pretty big. I mean, adult children sometimes act like little kids when it all comes down to push and shove. I don't want to do this. You should be doing this. You're the brother. You're the oldest. You're the youngest. You're the one that's not working that much. You shouldn't really be a part of this. What are you finding in your experience, how you handle working with a family going through a claim?
Yeah, and I think what I do is when somebody calls me up, when my client calls me up, I say to them, let me walk you through the claims process, right? And because this is something you absolutely can do yourself, or your children can do, whoever, you get a feel of wants to manage the claim. And then you can say to them, but if you don't want to manage the claim, there are people out there who can, like Linda Jenke or myself, right? So there are people out there that we do claim. So they can literally say, just sign the HIPAA releases and we will talk to the insurance company. We'll help them complete their application, their claims documentation. We'll talk to the doctors. We'll talk to the home care. We'll talk to the assisted living. We'll talk to the nurses. We'll talk to everyone involved and make sure all of that documentation goes in right the first time. Because one thing you don't want to do, and I tell my clients all the time, you have to take claims seriously, because the last thing you want is a denial. Once you have a denial, all those time requirements sort of go away, and they have plenty of time to delay denials. So you go from a 30-day processing to a 60-day processing, and it's from the last piece of information. So you can be waiting 60 days and say, oh, we need one more piece of documentation, and you're 60 days out again. It's ridiculous, completely unacceptable in an appeal. And sometimes it's not the company who handles the appeal. They sometimes take the appeal, once they get through the claims process, if you're denied, that appeal can go to a whole different division that's managing claims for appeals. So it's much, much more difficult to manage an appeal than it is to get it right the first time. So most importantly, you want to get the claims right the first time. You can guide them through the process. Know that on the CLT, all of you who are CLTCs, get online at CLTC. CLTC and I wrote a paper. It's free. You can give it to your clients. You can read it. It explains all the things that we have here, and it guides them through the claim process of the do's and don'ts, so to speak, to make sure that you have all your documentation in place. So you can use that. And as I said, when somebody says, I'm ready to make a claim, make sure that they tell you the information, and you can always have a specialist review the information before the information goes in. For my own clients, if somebody says I'm going to file a claim and I'm going to help them and they're my own client, of course, I say, listen, if you have any questions, you can send some of your documentation to me before and I can review it. So if they complete the application, they can send it to me. I can make sure that it's complete and that it's clear and unambiguous that they need to go into claim, right? So, but if they want me to, to actually reach out to doctors or to the assisted living, then of course I have to charge for those types of things. But I can help people, and Linda Jenke, who's fabulous and amazing at this, she's got an entire team, can help with the claims process. So you've got a backup plan. So it doesn't have to be you managing your client's claims. As long as you have somebody that you can refer them to, that can be helpful too. But you can always give them the first start. Let me guide you through the process. Let me send you the CLT book about claims. And then if you need any additional information, you can reach out to people who do this as a professional. So
this has been great, Linda. Just fantastic.
Good. So all right. Well, thank you, everybody. And I think we're just about at 4:59, so we're right on time.
Perfect. Absolutely perfect. It's been a delight. You know, you and I go back to the GE days and the Genworth days back in the early 2000s. So it's been a pleasure to be full circle with you on these things and working with you. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, everybody have a wonderful day. Thanks so much
Thanks,
for hanging in
Linda.
there and learning.
Thanks,
Appreciate it.
Joe.
Thank
Okay.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.